what I wanted to share with you today is not is trying to look at city from the point of view of data, and it's a bit different than what we have a group at MIT called SENSEable City Lab. Group at MIT called SENSEable City Lab. We are like 30 people in Boston and 10 in Singapore, in the design office in Italy and in Boston. But what I want to share with you today is actually something quite interesting that we think it's happening today in cities. And I said, what Jon Snow would do in today's London. Well, most of you are familiar with Jon Snow. And Jon Snow, here in London, like over 150 years ago, he started taking data in the city. In this case, look at data of where a cholera epidemic, where people were actually having choleras next to Soho. And as one of the fathers of epidemiology, he actually found out that all of those people were very close to a well, to a water well. And thanks to that, by mapping that, he actually realized for the first time how cholera was transmitted. Now, so all of this is about data in the city. Now, the amazing thing today, we believe, is that our cities have been covered layer with many, many different types of networks, of sensors. They produce an incredible amount of data. Let me just make an example. What you see here is a total number of cell phone connections on the planet. Still surprising today to think that in the 1970s, 1980s, we barely had cell phones. Today, we actually have over 6 billion connections. And you could think, we're 7 billion on the planet. How much more could this grow? Well, according to Ericsson, who usually is quite good and accurate in predictions, will be at 50 billion connections in 2020. And the reason for that is not that we'll have like 10 iPhones in our pockets, but because we started with something like this, connecting people to people, and then we moved to connecting people to data, connecting people to machine to data, and more is actually M2M, machine to machine. So all of this is actually producing an incredible amount of information. That's a quote from Eric Smith, but basically if you take all of the information produced by humanity from the beginning till 2003, well, the same amount was produced Thursday and Friday over the past couple of days. That's what The Economist has called the data deluge. One of my favorite actual definition of big data of this field is what Mike Batty gave in Singapore. We were together a few weeks ago, and he said, well, big data is all what you cannot put in an Excel spreadsheet. But it's this incredible amount of information we have today. And what I wanted to share with you is actually how all this information is revealing new dimensions in cities, in how we can describe them, and then also in how we can respond to that. We can understand them and finally design them. I will not focus much on design today, but more on the data itself. So the first type of data, opportunistic data, that's a visualization by Pedro Cruz, who's in our group at MIT. He used all of this opportunistic data. In this case, this is Lisbon. Is Lisbon seen from these thousands and thousands of taxis moving in the city, all of them with GPS? And you see how, they describe you the system and how the system almost live as a living system. Now, when you have this data, then you can do interesting things. That's a project. It's the first time I'm presenting it. It's something we're doing in New York. But actually, when you got all this information about taxis, then you can start to see how you could combine trips. Think how much energy is wasted just because so many people, without knowing in an unsynchronized way, take the same route, and how you can actually start to think how things could be combined is a kind of public transportation on demand, following something. In the past, it has always been us following the bus, but think about the bus or the taxi following us and responding to the demand of public transportation. The other things you can do, this is one of the largest ever social networks we built in the UK. That's based on data from BT that was actually collected for BBC. And what you can do is look at this and see how communities then are organized in space. Here's a quick video. Can we have the sound? Yeah. So every time we connect 2 points in space, we create this link. Think about this as the human network, how we all are connected, how we make transactions with each other. And then think about how you can use it in order to understand boundaries in communities. It's almost like a geography that doesn't come from the past, doesn't come from politics, from history, but really comes from all of us, a kind of bottom-up geography that defines space. the more natural way we all communicate with each other. And if you look at this, you see actually Scotland is very similar to the way we know it. But Wales is totally different. It's actually divided in 3 different parts, north, center, and south, and the center is much more connected to the rest of England. And then, you know, this is the same thing in the United States. You see, again, this kind of states merging and splitting, a more kind of natural geography of people. And then, you know, you can start to understand really some profound things about cities. You know, we still don't know exactly why we live in cities. Cities didn't exist once upon a time. 7,000 years ago, all of us, we didn't have cities. We were all hunters and gatherers. And then cities start. And now they're, as we heard, you know, from Ricky's beautiful presentation, you know, we got over 50% of the world's population living in city, and this keeps on growing very fast. But we still don't know exactly what is that brings all of us together in cities. One of the interesting papers a few years ago was by Jeffrey West and his team at Santa Fe Institute, and what they found is that actually in cities, you get 2 things. If you take, say, the number of patents, and you take a city, and increase the size of the city, then the amount of patents grows more than linearly, what is saying in a super linear way. While if you take the amount of asphalt, of infrastructure, that grows in a sublinear way. So cities is a way that actually, they bring us all together because the total is more than the sum of all the parts. And actually something interesting when we start looking at network, that's some work that's been published now, is that you see that actually the amount of intensity of communications we have with the people around us changes a lot from a small city to a big city. That's taking billions and billions of connections between people. And that is really what probably allows us to be more productive, allows us to exchange more ideas, and make cities a more creative and fun place to live. There's many other type of data sets. I'll go very fast. What you see here is actually data you can collect today from credit card transactions. You see Spain before Christmas. Here you see December 23rd. People actually going to buy things, groceries, hypermarkets, bars and restaurants. You see how they change at different times of the day up there. And then you got a day before Christmas when you remember all the things you've forgotten to buy for Christmas, all the presents, so there's a big peak. And then you get in a moment then to Christmas Day, which is very, very flat, and but still with a few activities happening. So it becomes a way to describe cities and the life in cities as it happens. And you know, and you can take this and analyze it and see how it's different when you look for food, that you look at it very close to where you stay, or look for fashion, you actually want to travel much more, and then how all of these different activities happen over space and connect with each other. You know, they can tell you actually how you can use it in order to design a better cities, or a city that responds better to citizens. Now, the other type of data I wanted to briefly share with you is something we think is very exciting today. It's what's called usually user-generated content. And that's all that information that we all produce when we use a social network, when we take pictures. In this case, for instance, we were one of the first groups to look at pictures. Each of us today is kind of a walking camera. We take an incredible amount of digital pictures. A lot of them go into databases. And then you can actually analyze this to understand what's going on in the city. So what you see here is Tuscany, and you see where people take pictures in Tuscany. And then you can zoom into Florence, and you can look at the city, what happens there. So you can zoom even more and look at the Duomo and where people take pictures. Now, then if you do a little script and look at the time stamps of the pictures, then you can put them in order and look at traces and trajectories. And what you see here is actually Americans and Italians as they move and take pictures in Tuscany. Now, here's a question. So where are the Americans? To the left or to the right? So Americans to the left, raise your hand. Americans to the right, raise your hand. Great. I think, you know, the majority is actually right. Americans are to the left. You know, if you're coming from the United States, you come from the United States, you go to Italy once in a lifetime or once every 10 years, then you go to the main places, to Genoa, to Pisa, to Florence, to Siena, to Perugia. But actually, if you are Italian, you've been there many times, and look at how different it is, the way you move on space. And you go and look for hidden places, for little villages. Look at the island of Elba. No Americans there, but a lot of Italians actually moving. And then when you use this, you can actually look at other things. That's something one of our some of our students were very interested in. It's how you can use this information to see where's the best place to go partying in Barcelona. And here's in real time all the information coming from the city and telling you what's happening there. Incidentally, they even managed to get a paper based on studying the correlation between Britons and parties in the city. Actually, it happens to be quite strong. And then you can do other things. You know, in Spain, you got an issue about monitoring drought. And what about monitoring drought through all of these images? So you can look at the color and how green changes in the course of the day. We call the project the world's eyes, los ojos del mundo, as a way really to monitor and understand what happens in our cities, in our regions, through the eyes of all of us. Well, briefly, just the third type of data I wanted to share with you is what we can actually sense on purpose. And then all of our environment are getting more and more filled with sensors. This is a project we're doing with Audi, actually, where we're looking at a car and how information in the car can help us better understand what goes on, what's going on.
Measure road frustration, because I'm certainly frustrated at this point.
Oops.
So we were just sideswiped, and right now my stress level should be through the roof. We got the information, you know, we'll have to process the data and see where it's really at.
And just to finish, I wanted to share with you again, still in terms of data that's sensed through sensors we can put in the environment. You know, it's so cheap and inexpensive today to sense information. In this project, we actually looked at trash. And we look at the issue, if you take this computer, you know everything about this computer. Every chip, you know where it was produced, how it moved on the planet, how it became this machine. But actually, when you throw it away a few years from now, you know very little about it. And actually, a lot of e-waste ends up like this. So our idea was, what if we could develop a little chip that then we can put on trash and follow trash and see what happens to it? Here you can see the first deployment we did in Seattle with 3,000 tags, 500 volunteers, tagging every possible thing, electronics, but also other types of waste. And then following this, we started following the traces. You see Seattle, the day of deployment. After a few days, you see the main dumps next to the city. But then a big surprise, how far actually things started to travel. Sometimes in a crazy way. Look at the trace that went all the way to Chicago and then down to Baja California. Just for a printer cartridge, and how much energy was wasted there. And still moving after a month and 2 months. We thought that the Farewell Symphony was the music we needed. Well, what did we learn from this? Well, about all of this data, well, first of all, you can use it in order to better design or understand the system. So in this case, for instance, you can be an engineer, use all this data and see, well, how can I actually design another waste management system to save a lot of energy, to be much more efficient. Then there's another component we think is very important that comes from data, and that's actually how data can promote behavioral change. Now, one of the most telling things was after the project, somebody came to us and said, you know, I used to drink water in plastic bottles every day and put them outside my door and think the plastic would just disappear. But actually now, I know that's not the case. Actually, they don't disappear. They go a few miles from home and stay there forever. So because of this, because of the data, I actually started changing my behavior and I don't drink water in plastic bottles anymore. Now, so this was just a quick summary of how we think the data dimension is really changing our cities and allowing us to better understand them, and then what I didn't show today, how we can then move this into design, in a different way with this increased information. Now, the final thing I want to share with you is that something else that you could add, another category, like a fourth category, that I could call accidental data. And I just had an example about that. It's related to the last project. So we had all these tags that tell you where they go in our lab. And what happened is that a burglar came to our lab, installed a lot of stuff, including some of these tags that tell you where they go. And here is what happened. Right, thank you.